The baby arrived on a Tuesday in February 1945, in the specific way that the most consequential things sometimes arrive. Without announcement, without preparation, and in the company of so much noise and urgency that the specific thing itself was almost lost in surrounding chaos. She was working a double shift in the field hospital outside Cologne, one of the American military hospitals operating in the final months of the European campaign, processing the wounded at the rate that the final push into Germany was producing them. The wards were full. The staff was exhausted. The specific Tuesday in February was not a day that anyone in the hospital remembered afterward as the day that anything particular had happened, except for the woman this story is about, who remembered it for the rest of her life as the day everything changed. A German woman had been brought in by a military ambulance that had found her on a road outside the city. She was dying. Her injuries were beyond what the specific resources of the specific hospital could address, and the triage decision had been made before she arrived. She was conscious enough, when she was brought in, to communicate one thing. She was holding a baby, and the baby needed to survive. The baby was approximately 3 weeks old. The German woman was not the baby's mother. She had found him. She indicated to the German-speaking orderly who translated in a bomb building 2 days before, and had been carrying him since. She did not know whose baby he was. She did not know the baby's name. She knew only that the baby existed, and that she was about to stop existing, and that someone in this hospital needed to understand that the two facts were connected and required a response. The woman died within the hour. The baby was alive. Her name was Agnes. She was 31 years old, a registered nurse from Minnesota, who had been in the Army Nurse Corps since 1942 and who had served in North Africa and Italy before arriving in the European theater in the fall of 1944. She was not the nurse who had been present when the German woman arrived. She was the nurse who happened to be passing the specific ward at the specific moment when the specific problem of what to do with a 3-week-old baby of unknown parentage in the middle of a military hospital in occupied Germany had become the specific problem that needed a specific answer. She picked him up. She was not sure afterward exactly why she picked him up, whether it was a specific professional instinct of the trained caregiver responding to a crying infant, or the specific personal instinct of a particular woman at a particular moment, or simply the specific accident of being the specific person who happened to be in the specific place at the specific time when the specific thing needed doing. She picked him up. He stopped crying. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said later she understood that she was not going to put him down. Before I tell you the full story of what it took, legally, logistically, personally, for a 31-year-old Army nurse to bring a nameless German infant back to Minnesota in 1945, I want to ask you directly, subscribe and share this episode. The children left behind by the specific war were one of its least visible consequences, and the specific people who chose to take responsibility for those children were making a decision whose full cost would not be visible for years. Subscribe and hit the like button. Back to Agnes. Back to the baby nobody had a name for yet. The specific legal journey that Agnes and Richard the JAG officer undertook in those 6 weeks. The specific creative construction of a framework that did not exist is worth examining in more detail because it reveals something important about the specific conditions of the immediate post-war period and the specific human ingenuity that those conditions sometimes required. Germany in early 1945 was not a country with a functioning civil legal system. The Nazi government was collapsing, but had not yet fully collapsed. The Allied military government was in the process of establishing administrative authority over captured territory, but had not yet developed the specific institutions that would eventually govern post-war Germany. The specific legal status of German civilians, particularly children, in the zones of occupation was, in the spring of 1945, a genuinely unresolved question that the specific existing law had not anticipated in the specific forms the specific situation was producing. Richard, working from a small office in the hospital complex, identified 3 separate legal frameworks that might potentially apply to Thomas's situation, depending on how creatively one was willing to read them. The first was a German civil code, which under normal circumstances would have governed the adoption of a German infant. But the normal circumstances included a functioning German court system, which did not exist in the occupied zone. The second was American military law, which granted certain authorities to military commanders in occupied territories, but which had never contemplated the specific question of infant adoption. The third was a provision in the Geneva Conventions relating to protection of civilian children in occupied territories, which Richard read, with a considerable generosity he later admitted, as creating an implicit obligation on occupying powers to ensure the welfare of such children, an obligation that could be satisfied in the specific case of Thomas by the specific arrangement Agnes was proposing. He wrote a legal memorandum that ran to 14 pages and that the commanding officer of the hospital's parent unit described, when asked about it decades later in an interview, as the most creative piece of legal reasoning he'd encountered in 20 years of military service. He meant this as a compliment. He signed the memorandum. The paperwork began its journey through the specific channels that the specific memorandum had identified, and 6 months later, in November 1945, Agnes boarded the transport ship with Thomas in a blanket her mother had sent and arrived in New York as the legal guardian of a German infant whose legal adoption under American law would be finalized the following spring. Richard went back to Ohio after the war. He became a practicing attorney, specializing in family law. He and Agnes corresponded for years, and he attended Thomas's high school graduation in 1963. The specific occasion prompting the specific reunion of the two people who had built the specific legal framework from scratch in a German hospital in 1945. Agnes said at the graduation dinner that she had never properly thanked Richard for what he had done, and Richard said that the specific thanks were unnecessary because the specific case had been the most interesting legal problem he had ever been asked to solve, and that interesting legal problems were their own reward. Thomas grew up knowing about Richard, too, the Ohio lawyer who had helped Agnes build the specific paperwork bridge between the specific German field hospital and the specific Minnesota town. Thomas visited Richard in Ohio once, in 1979, when Richard was in his 70s and still practicing. They talked for 3 hours. Thomas said afterward that what struck him most about Richard was how completely the older man remembered every detail of the specific legal problem they had solved together 34 years earlier, every regulation consulted, every argument constructed, every officer persuaded, with a specific vivid recall of a person for whom the specific problem had been, precisely as he had told Agnes at the graduation dinner, the most interesting he had ever been given. The specific network of people who had made Thomas's life possible: Agnes, Richard, the hospital commanding officer who had signed the memorandum, the specific German orderly who had translated the dying woman's final communication, the specific transport officer who had found a berth on a ship for an unexpected infant, Agnes's mother who had sent the blanket, were the specific people whose specific contributions Thomas eventually documented in the memoir he wrote about Agnes in 2003. Precisely because he understood that the specific life he had been given was not the product of one decision, but of a specific chain of specific decisions made by a specific series of specific people, each of whom had chosen, in the specific moment available to them, to help rather than not to help. The specific German orderly who had translated the dying woman's words, who had made it possible for her final communication to reach Agnes and the hospital staff in the form that produced a specific understanding of Thomas's situation, was a man Thomas was never able to identify or locate. His name was not recorded in any of the hospital's surviving documentation. He appears in Agnes's own account of the events simply as the orderly who translated, present for the specific crucial minutes, and then absent from the specific subsequent record entirely. Thomas dedicated one paragraph of the 2003 memoir to this unnamed man, saying only that there was a person present on the specific Tuesday in February whose contribution to the specific Tuesday had been as essential as any others, and whose name was gone, and that the specific gratitude owed him was the specific gratitude owed anyone whose specific act of translation, in the broadest sense of that word, the making of one person's reality comprehensible to another, had produced consequences far larger than the specific moment could have anticipated. Agnes read the memoir before she died. She received it in her 83rd year, when Thomas brought the manuscript to her house and read her the sections about herself while she sat in the specific chair by the window where she spent most of her days by that point. She cried twice, once at the section about the dying German woman on the road, which Agnes had never been able to speak about without difficulty in all the decades since, and once at the dedication, which read simply, "To Agnes who picked me up." She did not comment on the dedication, when Thomas read it. She sat with it for a moment, and then she said, "Read me the part about Richard again." He did. She smiled. She said, "He was very good at his job." Thomas said he was. Then they sat quietly for a while in the specific afternoon light of the specific Minnesota house where Thomas had grown up, and Agnes looked at the window, and the silence between them was the specific silence of the specific people who have said the specific most important things already and who are now simply occupying the specific same space in the specific available time. She died the following year. Thomas was at her bedside. The house is still in the family. She named him Thomas, not after anyone in particular. She said she had simply needed a name to put on the paperwork that the military bureaucracy immediately began to generate around the situation of the unauthorized infant in the authorized field hospital, and Thomas was a name that came to her when the specific form asked for a name. He became Thomas on a Tuesday in February 1945 in a military hospital outside Cologne. Given a name by a woman who was not his mother and would spend the next 40 years becoming one. The specific bureaucratic process of what Agnes was attempting to do, to adopt a German infant of completely unknown parentage as an American citizen and bring him home from a war zone, was a process for which no established procedure existed. Because no established procedure had been designed for exactly this situation. The military had procedures for orphaned children of American servicemen. It had procedures gradually being developed for the surviving children of liberated camp populations. It did not have a procedure for a German infant of completely unknown parentage who had been found in a bombed building and whose only connection to any identifiable person was the dying woman on the road and the nurse who had picked him up. Agnes navigated this absence of procedure with a specific tenacity that every person who knew her in that period later described as the most formidable version of herself they had ever observed. She was not by nature an aggressive person. Her colleagues describe her as steady, competent, warm, the specific kind of nurse who managed difficult situations through calm and reliability rather than force of will. In the specific situation of Thomas, something in her shifted. She became the person who did not take no for an answer, not because she had decided to become that person, but because the specific situation had made any other version of herself insufficient. She wrote letters. She found the specific officers with the specific authority to address the specific category of problem, and she explained the situation to each of them in turn. And when the explanation produced a referral to a different officer, she found that officer and explained again. She found a military lawyer, a young JAG officer from Ohio named Richard, who had no experience with adoption law, but who had a specific instinct for the specific kind of bureaucratic problem that requires the specific creative interpretation of existing regulations rather than the specific procedure that the specific regulations had never anticipated. Richard and Agnes together spent 6 weeks building the specific legal framework that did not exist for the specific situation they were in, drawing on German law and American military law and international law, and at least one regulation that Richard later admitted he had interpreted with what he called considerable generosity. She kept Thomas in the meantime, not in the specific official capacity of the specific adoptive parent. That status did not yet exist legally and would not for months, in the specific practical capacity of the specific person who had the specific baby, and who was feeding him and keeping him warm and making sure he survived while the specific legal machinery moved at the specific pace that legal machinery moves. The hospital staff accommodated this with the specific quiet collective pragmatism of people who had spent years navigating situations and regulations did not fully address. Nobody asked too many questions. Thomas existed. Agnes was caring for him. The work of the hospital continued around both of them. She brought him home to Minnesota in November 1945, 7 months after the war in Europe ended. Carry him off a transport ship in New York wrapped in a blanket her mother had sent over because Agnes had written home in April to say she was bringing a baby and had requested, practically and without particular drama, that someone sent a blanket because European November was cold. Her family received this information with the specific complicated mix of responses that the specific situation produced. Her mother was supportive, immediately and practically, in the specific way of the Minnesota farm woman who processes an unusual development by identifying what needs to be done and doing it. Her father was quieter, more uncertain, taking several months to fully arrive at a position about the specific situation that satisfied him. Her two brothers had varying responses that evolved over following years as Thomas became, simply and undeniably, part of the family in a specific way that children become part families. Through presence, through time, through the specific accumulation of the specific ordinary shared experiences that constitute a family regardless of the specific circumstances of the specific beginning. The specific community of the specific Minnesota town had its own responses. Agnes had not been certain, bringing Thomas home, what those responses would be. The war had just ended. The specific Germans were the specific recently defeated enemy. The specific German infant she was carrying off a ship was not, in the specific cultural moment of November 1945, an unambiguously welcome addition to any American household, and Agnes understood this and had prepared herself for whatever the specific community's specific response would be. The specific community's response was, in aggregate, more generous than she had feared and not without its specific complications. There were specific people who were warm from beginning, who saw a baby and a woman who had made a decision, and who did not require anything more than that to extend the specific practical warmth to the specific small-town community. There were specific others who were slower, who needed more time, who had lost specific people in the specific war, and who found a specific German infant in their midst a specific complication of the specific feelings they were still processing. The specific broader context of war orphans in post-war Europe, the specific scale of the problem that Thomas represented one small instance of, illuminates Agnes's specific decision within the larger pattern of what the specific war had produced. Estimates of the number of children left without parents or family in Europe at the end of the Second World War range from 1 million to as many as 13 million, depending on the specific definition used and the specific regions included. The specific numbers are imprecise because the specific record-keeping of the specific chaos of the specific war's final months was itself imprecise, and because the specific category of the displaced child was itself unstable. Children separated from parents who were still alive, children whose parents had died but whose extended family remained, children of completely unknown parentage like Thomas, children who knew their identities but whose families had been scattered across national boundaries that had themselves been redrawn by the war's outcome. The specific international organizations that addressed this problem, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, the International Tracing Service, the various national Red Cross organizations, were, in the spring and summer 1945, attempting to manage a human crisis of a scale that none of their existing procedures had been designed for. The specific systems they developed, rapidly and often imperfectly, focused primarily on repatriation, returning displaced children to the specific countries, and, where possible, the specific families they had come from. The specific child like Thomas, who had no identifiable country or family origin, no surviving relatives, no documentation of any kind, represented the specific edge case that the specific repatriation-focused systems were least equipped to address. Agnes's decision to adopt Thomas rather than relinquish him to the specific available institutional systems was, among other things, a specific assessment of what those systems could offer him. She had seen the specific displaced children's camps that the specific Allied administration had established in Germany, had visited one as part of medical inspection in March 1945, and had come away with a specific and clear-eyed understanding of the specific conditions and the specific probable outcomes for specific children in the specific care. She did not dismiss the specific efforts of the specific people running the specific camps, who were doing the specific best available work in the specific impossible conditions. She simply concluded, privately and without announcing conclusion to anyone, that the specific Thomas would not thrive in those conditions, and that the specific alternative she was in a position to offer was a specific better option for the specific child in the specific situation. This assessment was both entirely correct and entirely subjective. There is no way to know what would have happened to Thomas in the specific institutional care, because Thomas did not go there. What is known is what happened to him with Agnes. He grew up in Minnesota, attended school, played with the neighboring children, found a vocation in civil engineering, married, had 3 children of his own, and lived a long and full life that he describes in 2003 memoir, without self-pity or false modesty, as a good life. This is the specific evidence available, and it is sufficient. The specific 1987 visit to Germany, the year Thomas met his biological aunt, was complicated in ways that the brief account in the main narrative does not fully capture. The DNA testing that had led Thomas to the Cologne family had been conducted as part of a larger genealogical research project on war orphans that a German academic institution had organized, and Thomas had participated not with any particular expectation of finding family, but with a specific motivation of someone who wanted, simply, to know whatever could be known about where he had come from. The specific aunt, her name was Gerda. She was in her 70s, and she had spent 40 years assuming that her sister's baby had died in the bombing that had killed her sister, received a contact from the German research institution with the specific disbelief that such contacts produce in people who have long since completed their grieving and who are now being asked, in effect, to uncomplete it. She required several weeks before she was willing to meet Thomas, and when she finally agreed to the meeting, she specified that it be in a public place, a cafe in Cologne, not her home. Because she was not yet certain how much of the specific private space of the specific private life she would prepare to open to the specific stranger who was also her nephew. Thomas arrived at the cafe and found a woman who had his eyes. This is a specific detail he returns to most often in his memoir when describing the meeting. Not the conversation, not the tears, not the specific information exchanged about the specific family history. The specific eyes. He said, I had spent 42 years looking at photographs of Agnes's family and seeing no version of myself in any of them, in the specific way that adopted children do not see themselves in specific family photographs. And then I walked into a cafe in Cologne and sat down across from a woman I had never met who had my eyes, and the specific sensation was unlike anything I had experienced before or since. It was not comfort exactly. It was not grief exactly. It was something else. The specific experience of the specific visual confirmation that there was a biological line, a genetic continuity, that connected me to the specific world before the specific Tuesday in February 1945, when Agnes picked me up. Gerda told him what she knew of his mother, her sister, who had died in the bombing while Thomas was apparently elsewhere in the building and survived the collapse that killed her. She told him his mother's name. She told him what his mother had been like, her humor, her stubbornness, her specific way of laughing that Gerda said she had heard in Thomas's laugh within the first minutes of their meeting in the cafe, before she had allowed herself to fully believe who he was. Thomas came home from Germany with his mother's name. He added it to the dedication of the memoir he was already planning. The memoir published in 2003 that reads, To Agnes, who picked me up, and to Elsa, who had me first. Agnes knew about the Germany trip. She received the account with a specific characteristic completeness of her listening, entirely present, asking the specific questions, sitting with a specific weight of what Thomas was telling her about the specific woman named Elsa and the specific aunt with his eyes. When he had finished, she said, Does it change anything? He said, No, it doesn't change anything. She said, Good. Then she made dinner. This exchange, does it change anything? No, it doesn't change anything. Good. Then she made dinner, is a specific exchange that Thomas quotes most frequently when he speaks publicly about Agnes and about what she gave him. He says that the specific 8 words she said after he described the Germany trip are the specific, most precise expression of the specific nature of the specific relationship she had built with him over 42 years. The relationship was not threatened by the existence of Elsa, was not diminished by the specific German family, was not in competition with any other connection Thomas had or discovered or built. It was simply itself, complete, secure, available, and entirely independent of whatever else Thomas was or had come from. She picked him up. She raised him. Elsa had him first. Agnes was his mother. All of these were true simultaneously, and none of them contradicted any of the others. And Agnes had always known this and had built a specific relationship on the specific foundation of the specific knowing. The Germany trip changed nothing because the relationship between Agnes and Thomas had never depended on Thomas having no other story. It had depended on Agnes having picked him up, and on everything that had grown from that single act in the 43 years between the specific Tuesday in 1945 and the specific year she died. Subscribe and share this story with someone who understands that a family is built rather than simply arrived at, and that the building is a specific act of love that the arriving alone can never constitute. He held her hand when she died. She had picked him up when he had no one. Both of those are the same story. That is the full accounting of the war nurse who adopted the baby no one else wanted and raised him alone. Agnes navigated this with the same specific tenacity she had applied to the bureaucratic process. Patient but not passive, warm but not defensive, willing to let the specific people who needed time take the specific time they needed, while not permitting the specific time-taking to become the specific obstacle to the specific life she was building. She was raising Thomas. The community around her would, in time, either include him or would not, and she had made her decision about Thomas independent of what the community's decision about him would eventually be. The community mostly included him, not perfectly, not without the specific moments of the specific difficulty that the specific circumstances produced, but genuinely, over time, in the specific way that communities come to regard the specific children who grow up in them as their own, regardless of the specific origin of the specific children. Thomas went to school in the specific town. He played with the specific children of the specific families. He grew up belonging to the specific place in the specific way that is only possible through the specific accumulated presence of the specific years. Agnes never married. This was not, she said in the memoir she wrote in 1983, a deliberate decision. She had not decided against marriage in the specific way of the specific principled choice. It was, she said, more that the specific life she was building with Thomas had a specific fullness that the specific available marriages she had been offered did not add to the specific way she would have required marriage to add to it. She had been offered specific marriages. She had declined them. She did not experience the declining as a sacrifice, which she was careful to say because she understood that the specific cultural narrative of the single woman who raises a child alone tends to cast a specific aloneness as a specific sacrifice. It was not a sacrifice. It was a specific life she had chosen, and she had chosen it completely. Thomas grew up knowing the full story of his origins, or rather, the full story as far as it could be known, which was not the full story, but the specific partial story that the specific circumstances permitted. He knew he was German by birth. He knew he had been found in a bomb building. He knew the German woman who had carried him to the hospital had died. He knew Agnes had picked him up and decided not to put him down. He knew he had been named Thomas on a Tuesday in February because the form needed a name, and Thomas was the name that came to her. He grew up with this story. Agnes told it to him early and simply and without drama, in the specific way she had decided the telling required. Not as a specific tragedy of the specific orphan child, which it was, but as a specific beginning of the specific life he had actually lived, which had been, by every measure available, a good life. She wanted him to know the story. She did not want the story to be the thing that defined him more than the life that had followed from it. She told it, and then she kept living the life alongside him. And the life alongside him was a specific ongoing evidence that the story had produced something real and lasting and worth having. He found out in 1987 that he was German. He already knew this. In the general sense, Agnes had told him he had been found in Germany, that the language spoken around his birth had been German. But in 1987, through a combination of the specific German records that had been made newly accessible and the specific genealogical research that had become possible in ways that had not been in 1945, he found a specific German family that the specific DNA testing of the period identified as his biological family. A family from Cologne, a father who had died in the war, a mother who had died in the bombing, an aunt who was still alive. He went to Germany. He met the aunt. He sat across a table from a woman who had not known he existed and who now knew he was her sister's son. And they looked at each other across the specific table in the specific German city where his life had begun. And the specific meeting was a specific, most complicated human encounter either of them had ever had, full of the specific grief for what had been lost and the specific wonder at what had survived and the specific impossibility of fully accounting for either. He came home to Minnesota. He told Agnes about the aunt. She listened completely, in the specific way she had always listened to the specific important things, entirely present, entirely there, asking the specific questions that showed she had heard every word. When he had finished, she said, "Does it change anything?" He said, "No, it doesn't change anything." She said, "Good." Then she made dinner. She died in 1998 at 84, in the house she had lived in for 50 years in the specific Minnesota town where she had brought Thomas home in November 1945. Thomas was at her bedside. He held her hand. He said afterward, that he had tried in the final hours to find the specific words for the specific thing, to say the specific thing that the specific 43 years had amounted to and what the specific woman who had picked him up in a German hospital and decided not to put him down had given him. He could not find the specific words. He held her hand instead. She died. He wrote the memoir about her in 2003. He dedicated it to Agnes, who picked me up. That is a full accounting of the war nurse who adopted the baby no one else wanted and raised him alone, and who spent 43 years demonstrating that the specific decision made on a specific Tuesday in a specific field hospital outside Cologne was a specific right decision, not because it resolved easily or proceeded without difficulty, but because it produced, at the end of it, a man who held her hand and could not find the words, and a life that both of them had lived completely. She picked him up. She raised him. He held her hand. That is enough. That is everything. The specific question of what Agnes gave up, the specific cost she paid to the story of what she built sometimes obscures, deserves its own accounting, because the memoir Thomas wrote about her was, appropriately and lovingly, more focused on what Agnes had given than on what she had sacrificed, and the full picture requires both. She left the Army Nurse Corps in December 1945, when the specific combination of the war's end and Thomas's legal situation made the specific continuation of her service the specific, less important priority. She had served for 3.5 years across 3 theaters, and she had been good at her work. Her service record, which Thomas reproduced in part in the 2003 memoir, was a specific record of someone who had earned the specific respect of the specific people who had worked alongside her. She left without ceremony, which was a specific normal departure of the specific women who had served in the specific wartime roles that the specific peacetime was ending. She came home to Minnesota with Thomas and became, in the specific way that the specific post-war American culture managed these things, simply a woman with a child, in a town where people mostly asked few questions and got on with their lives. The career she had built as a nurse, the specific clinical competence developed through 3.5 years of the specific, most demanding medical context the specific era produced, she brought home with her and continued to apply. She worked at the local hospital in the specific Minnesota town for 27 years, retiring in 1973 at the age of 60. The specific nursing career was not the sacrifice. The specific combination of the nursing career and the raising of Thomas, managed simultaneously for the specific years when Thomas was still at home, was a specific demanding life that she had chosen and that she managed with a specific characteristic efficiency of a person who does not waste motion on the specific unnecessary. What she gave up was harder to name. She had been, before the war, in a relationship with a man from Iowa, a farmer's son she had met in nursing school, who was serving the Pacific when she was in Europe, and who had written to her throughout the specific years of the specific war. The relationship had survived the war in the specific form of the specific correspondence, and there was, she indicated in passing the memoir, but never in any more explicit form, the specific expectation on both sides that the correspondence would survive the war in the specific, more permanent form of the specific marriage. It did not. The specific Thomas was the specific reason, or was the specific part of the specific reason. Agnes was characteristically indirect about this in the memoir, using the specific language of the person who has resolved something privately and does not require the specific resolution to be publicly documented. She said only that she had made her decision about Thomas before she had fully thought through all of its implications for the specific other things in her life, and that when she had thought them through, she had found that she did not want to change her decision, and that the specific man from Iowa, who was a good man and who deserved a direct answer, received one. The specific man from Iowa married someone else. He lived a good life. Agnes did not speak of him again in the memoir after the single passage in which she alluded to his existence. Thomas, researching the memoir, asked her directly about this passage. Who was a man from Iowa? What had happened? Did she regret it? She told him about the man in the specific brief terms that the memoir reflects. She said she did not regret it. Thomas believed her. He also noted, in the memoir, that he understood he was not entirely an objective observer of whether his mother regretted the specific decision that had made his own existence possible, and that the specific objectivity on this question was permanently beyond his reach, and that this was something he had learned to hold alongside everything else that was true about the specific story. He was honest about this. The memoir is full of the specific honesty, The specific acknowledgement of the specific things he could not know and the specific limits of his own perspective on the specific story that was also his own. He knew that Agnes had given things up. He did not know the full weight of what she had given up, because she had not given him the full weight, and he was not certain she had been wrong to keep it. He honored what she had given him and acknowledged the specific limits of what he could see about what she had sacrificed. Both honoring and acknowledging were the specific acts of the specific love that the specific 43 years had produced between them. She picked him up in a German field hospital on a Tuesday in February 1945. He held her hand in a Minnesota bedroom in 1998. The specific 53 years between those two moments were the specific life she had chosen and that he had been given, and that neither of them, by every available evidence, ever wished had been different. That is a specific full accounting of what was given and what it cost. Both were real. Both were hers to give and to spend as she chose. She chose him. That is the whole story. Thomas's 3 children, Agnes's grandchildren, born in the 1970s and 1980s, grew up with a specific story as a specific foundation of the specific family mythology, the way all families have a founding story that everything else is built around. Their founding story was this. A nurse picked up a baby in Germany and brought him home. That was the story. Everything else, the specific field hospital, the specific dying woman on the road, the specific JAG officer in his 14-page memorandum, the specific blanket Agnes's mother sent, the specific community-specific complicated reception, all of that was a specific texture around the specific founding story, available to the grandchildren in more detail as they grew older and became capable of receiving more detail, but never displacing a specific simple center. A nurse picked up a baby and brought him home. Thomas had been deliberate about this. He had watched, in his professional and personal life, the specific ways that the specific complicated origin stories, the specific ones with the specific tragedy and the specific displacement and the specific loss at their center, could become the specific thing that defines a specific person in ways that crowd out the specific other things. He had decided, consciously and early in his children's lives, that the story of how he had come to exist would be told to them in the specific form that emphasized the choice rather than the circumstances, the specific nurse who had picked up the specific baby. Because the choice was a specific thing that had actually mattered, and the circumstances were the specific context in which the choice had been made rather than the choice itself. His eldest daughter said, in an interview she gave after the memoir's publication, that growing up with the story had given her a specific and unusual relationship to the concept of family, one that emphasized construction over biology, decision over inheritance, the specific ongoing act of choosing one another over the specific passive fact of being born into proximity. She said she had spent most of her adult life unable to fully explain to people why she found the specific biological emphasis that most people place on the specific concept of family somewhat puzzling, before she finally understood that she found it puzzling because she had been raised in a family whose founding act was a specific, most explicit possible rejection of biology as a primary determining factor of family, a nurse who shared no blood with a baby, choosing him completely out of nothing but the specific decision made in the specific moment, and sustaining that decision for 43 years. She said, "My grandmother's decision made me understand that family is a verb, not a noun. It's something you do repeatedly over a long time, or it's nothing at all. I think that's the most important thing my family has ever taught me." Agnes had not set out to teach anyone anything. She had picked up a baby because the baby needed picking up, and she was a specific person in the specific place at the specific time. But the specific lesson her granddaughter articulated, that family is a verb, not a noun, is a specific lesson that the specific 53 years between the specific German field hospital and the specific Minnesota bedroom have been quietly demonstrating, one specific ordinary day at a time, for the entire duration. The 2003 memoir is in several libraries. The oral history of the German visit is in the Cologne Regional Archive. The specific Minnesota house where Agnes raised Thomas is still standing, still in the family. Thomas and his wife bought it from the estate after Agnes's death and have maintained it in the specific way of people who understand that the specific place has a specific significance that transcends a specific real estate. The specific Tuesday in February 1945 is not commemorated anywhere. There's no plaque on the site of the field hospital outside Cologne, which no longer stands. There is no marker for the German woman who had carried Thomas to the hospital door and made it possible for the specific moment of the specific picking up to happen. There is no institutional record of the specific moment itself, the specific nurse, the specific baby, the specific decision. What exists is the memoir and the family, and a man who held his mother's hand when she died, and 3 grandchildren who grew up understanding that family is something you choose rather than something that simply happens to you. She picked him up. She raised him alone. He held her hand. That is the full accounting. Subscribe and share this story with someone who knows what it means to choose a family member rather than simply inherit one. The choosing is the whole story. There are other women whose stories run parallel to Agnes's, and whose existence alongside hers completes the picture of what the specific immediate post-war moment produced in the specific women who found themselves in the specific position of the specific person who could help and who chose to. There was a Red Cross worker named Helen who had been stationed in the Philippines in 1945 and who brought home, against all available regulation, and with the specific help of the specific sympathetic commanding officer who chose not to notice certain things on certain forms, a Filipino infant whose mother had died in the final weeks of the Japanese occupation. Helen raised a child in Oregon. The child, a daughter, whom she named Ruth, grew up, attended college, became a teacher, and in 1973 helped Helen write a brief account of the specific circumstances of her adoption for a regional women's history project. The account runs to 4 pages and is one of the most direct and unadorned documents in the collection. Helen simply described what had happened, how she had managed the paperwork, and what Ruth had become, without drama and without apology. There was an army dietitian named Patricia who had served in the Pacific and who came home in 1946 with a Japanese-American infant whose parents had both died in the specific infusion of the specific post-war period in occupied Japan. Died not in combat, but in the specific ordinary circumstances of disease and accident that the specific post-war chaos produced at rates the specific histories do not always record carefully. Patricia faced a specific additional complication that the specific cultural moment of 1946 in America made the specific reception of a Japanese infant the specific, more complicated social undertaking than Agnes had faced with Thomas. She managed it with the specific, particular determination of someone who had decided that the specific cultural moment was the specific wrong guide for the specific right decision, and who did not permit the specific cultural moment to function as the specific veto. She was not going to give it. Both Helen and Patricia, like Agnes, never married after their returns. This pattern, the specific women who came back from a specific war with the specific children and who did not subsequently marry, is notable enough in the specific small literature on these cases to deserve mention, though it is not possible to draw a single conclusion about what the pattern represents across the specific varied women it describes. For some of them, the specific child may have been the specific reason. The specific calculation that the specific available men had not been prepared for the specific particular family arrangement, and that the specific arrangement was the specific non-negotiable. For others, the specific war itself may have been the specific reason. The specific independence and the specific self-sufficiency developed in the specific years of the specific service had made the specific particular available marriages the specific insufficient proposition. For still others, it may simply have been the specific individual circumstance of the specific individual woman, resistant to the specific general explanation. Agnes, asked directly in her memoir whether the specific Thomas had been the specific reason she had not married, gave the specific careful answer that she had always given, that the specific life she had built was complete, that the specific completeness was not an accident, and that she had made the specific choices that had produced the specific completeness, and that the specific choices had included Thomas rather than excluding him. This is not quite the same as saying Thomas was the reason. It is also not saying he wasn't. It is a specific, honest answer of the specific person who understands that some questions do not have the specific, clean answers that the specific questions seem to require, and who has learned, over a specific lifetime, that the specific, honest account of the specific, complicated thing is always more valuable than the specific, comfortable simplification. She left the specific, comfortable simplification to the people who preferred it. She told the specific, true account in the specific form it actually took, which was a specific form of the specific life she had actually lived, and which was a specific complete life of the specific woman who had picked up a baby in a field hospital in 1945 and had raised him alone and had held his hand when she died. 53 years later, in the specific house in the specific Minnesota town, where the specific both of them had built the specific thing that the specific granddaughter had, correctly identified as a verb rather than a noun. She picked him up. The picking up was everything. The specific moment I want to end this episode with is not the specific Tuesday in February when Agnes picked Thomas up. It is an earlier moment, earlier by perhaps 30 seconds, that Agnes described once in the 1983 memoir, and that she never elaborated on further. She wrote, "Before I picked him up, I put my hand on his chest, now to check his breathing. I knew he was breathing. I could hear him. I put my hand on his chest because I needed, for one specific second, to feel the specific fact of him before I decided what to do with the specific fact of him. He was warm. He was small. He was completely there, in the specific way that the very young are completely there, entirely present, entirely dependent, entirely certain of their own right to exist without having any way to argue for it. I put my hand on his chest, and I felt that, and then I picked him up. This is the specific moment, not the picking up, which was the act. The hand on the chest, which was a specific perception that preceded the act. The specific 30 seconds of the specific, complete attention to the specific, complete fact of the specific small person who was completely there before Agnes made the specific decision that followed from the specific attention. She paid the specific attention. Then she acted on it. This is perhaps the most instructive thing in the entire story for anyone who is not a nurse in a German field hospital in 1945 and who is therefore not facing the specific situation Agnes faced. The attention came first. The specific decision followed from the specific attention. She was not the specific person who picked up a baby because she had decided to pick up a baby. She was a specific person who paid the specific complete attention to the specific complete fact of the specific small person, and who then did what the specific attention revealed was necessary. She put her hand on his chest. She felt the specific fact of him. She picked him up. The picking up was the act of love. The hand on the chest was a perception that made the act of love possible. Both were Agnes. Both were the specific 30 seconds that the specific 53 years followed from. He was warm. He was small. He was completely there. She picked him up. That is enough. That is everything. That is the full accounting of the war nurse who adopted the baby no one else wanted and raised him alone. The specific broader phenomenon of American servicewomen who brought home children from the specific theaters where they served, children who would not otherwise have survived, or who would have survived in specific institutional care that the specific post-war systems provided rather than in the specific particular care of the specific particular woman who made the specific particular choice, is a phenomenon that the specific histories of the specific wars have underrepresented, primarily because the specific women involved were, for the most part, the specific people who did not publicize their own stories. Agnes published her memoir in 1983, nearly 40 years after the events it described, at Thomas's urging and with Thomas's help assembling the specific documents that the specific account required. Helen's account of Ruth appears only in the specific Regional Women's History Project from 1973. Patricia's story was documented only in the specific oral history interview that her daughter arranged in 2001, after Patricia's death, combining Patricia's own writings with the daughter's recollections of what she had been told across a lifetime. All three of these women chose, for most of their lives, not to tell their stories publicly. This was not false modesty. It was a specific assessment of the specific women that the specific story was primarily Thomas's and Ruth's and the Japanese-American daughter's story rather than their own, and that the specific privacy of the specific children they had raised deserved more protection than the specific public interest in the specific remarkable circumstances of the specific adoptions required them to override. They told their stories eventually, when the children were adults capable of consenting to the telling, and when the specific distance of the specific decades had made the specific telling the specific less intrusive thing. Agnes told her story because Thomas asked her to. Thomas asked her to because he understood, by the time he was in his 50s, that the specific story of the specific picking up was not only a story, but a story about a specific kind of human choice that deserved to be in the specific, accessible record for the specific people who might need it. People facing a specific moment when a specific decision presents itself, and who need to know that the specific decision, once made and fully committed to, produces something real and lasting and worth the specific cost. He asked her to tell it. She told it. He read her the manuscript when it was done, sitting in the specific chair by the window in the specific Minnesota house. She cried twice. She said, "Read me the part about Richard again. The memoir is in the libraries. The story is in the world. The specific Tuesday in February is permanent now." She picked him up. She raised him alone. He held her hand. That is the full accounting of the war nurse who adopted the baby no one else wanted and raised him alone. She chose him. He was warm. He was small. He was completely there. She chose him. Agnes's granddaughter. Thomas's eldest daughter. Keeps the 2003 memoir on the shelf in her own kitchen, in a specific place where the specific books that matter most in a household tend to end up. Visible from the table, accessible without effort, the kind of book that gets picked up and reread in pieces rather than from the beginning, because every section can stand on its own and every section rewards return. She said in an interview that she has read the chapter about the specific Tuesday in February more times than she can count, and that every reading produces the same specific response in her. Not sadness, not even primarily awe, but the specific feeling she can only describe as a reminder. A reminder that the specific ordinary Tuesday can contain the specific extraordinary decision, and that the specific ordinary person can be the specific person who makes it, and that the specific making of it changes everything that follows. Her grandmother was a specific ordinary person on the specific ordinary Tuesday. She made the specific decision. Everything followed from it. The memoir is in the libraries. The reminder is in the world.